Hi, I'm Marcin Kuśmierczyk. Welcome to Eastern Insights. Why does Eastern Europe's perspective on global affairs matter? Because here, history and geopolitics collide in ways that shape our world. Yet these voices often go unheard. This podcast bridges this gap. Each episode translates in-depth analysis from my Polish YouTube channel, Polityka Zagraniczna, which means international politics. For the last few years, this platform has dissected foreign policy, security, and the forces shaping Eastern Europe. Using AI tools like 11 Labs, we adapt these nuanced insights into English, preserving their depth while making them accessible to all. Whether we're unpacking Russia's latest moves, EU debates, or security challenges in Central Europe, our mission is simple: to foster informed dialogue by sharing Eastern Europe's untold stories. If you're curious about the world beyond headlines, subscribe now. Join me as we decode the complexities of global affairs, one Eastern European insight at a time.
Welcome back to the show. Today, we're diving into something pretty significant for our region: the 3 Cs initiative. It's been 10 years, and there's a lot to unpack. What were the big promises, and where do things stand today? You know, back in 2017, when Poland hosted the 3 Cs summit, you couldn't not hear about it. It felt like a massive deal. We had leaders from countries between the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Seas all gathering here in Warsaw, and with the President of the United States even showing up. Well, that really elevated the event, putting it firmly on the map, not just regionally, but as an important political moment. The 3 Cs initiative really sparked people's imagination. Beyond the core focus on economic and infrastructure projects, which are super important, of course, there were these broader visions emerging. People started talking about closer political cooperation in our part of the continent. Fast forward to the end of April 2025. Warsaw hosted the summit again. But honestly, if you weren't already invested in the topic, you might have completely missed it. Compared to that 2017 summit, the presence in traditional media and the reaction on social media were much quieter. It kind of got lost in the noise of the election campaign and then just faded into the May atmosphere. So what happened? Maybe it's something more than just timing. Has the 3 Cs initiative lost some of its initial spark, at least for part of the public? Are we perhaps not associating it with the same level of hope we did years ago? This is actually the 10th summit of the 3 Cs initiative. And for President Andrzej Duda, this is his last one. The 3 Cs has certainly been a really key part of his foreign policy achievements. Given that, it feels like a perfect moment for a quick summary. A little assessment of these past 10 years. Has the 3 Cs been a success? Or maybe an unfulfilled hope? That's what we're here to explore. Stick around. Short pause. So, what exactly is the 3 Cs initiative? It involves 13 EU countries situated between the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Seas. The main goal? To build better infrastructure, digital, and energy connections across the region. To really get a sense of what that means in practice, let's look at the projects, both the ones completed and those still planned. We're talking about gas interconnectors, highways, railway lines, gas ports, a total of 143 projects. As of a report from last year, about 37% of the financing for these projects had been secured. For Poland, some of the 3 Cs projects include major routes like the Via Carpathia, Rail Baltica, and the Amber Railway Corridor heading south. You can actually find a full list of all the projects linked in the episode description. There are definitely projects that have been completed, like the gas connection between Poland and Lithuania. Now, it's important to understand something key here. The 3 Cs initiative itself isn't the body building these connections or implementing these projects. Its role is more about coordination, the actual work on the ground, the implementation of these infrastructure sections. That's done by the individual member states. Also, the 3 Cs initiative typically doesn't provide the funding for most of these projects. The 3 Cs fund is just one piece, a relatively small piece, of the overall financial puzzle. Let's be honest, many of these projects probably would have happened even without the 3 Cs initiative. But what the initiative does do is help speed things up. It provides a political umbrella and creates a space for international discussions to coordinate actions among a larger group. This is crucial for implementing projects whose scale goes beyond just one or two EU countries. Now, at this point, two main points of doubt or reasons for a lack of perceived impact often come up. The first is this. Despite attracting strategic partners like the United States, the European Commission, Germany, Japan, Turkey, and Spain, and despite the creation of the 3Cs Fund, we haven't really seen a massive flood of investment driven by the initiative's activities. Initially, there were high hopes for this, especially concerning the Americans. For the US, developing infrastructure in the region, particularly for receiving and shipping things like carbon dioxide, was seen as a positive step. It opened up a potentially large export market for American producers. Here's the thing, though. The region, wanting to reduce dependence on Russian energy supplies and avoid energy blackmail, needed to build this kind of infrastructure anyway. Poland, for example, had to build it. And it's a really good thing we did, because it makes us much more energy secure today, but this meant the Americans didn't necessarily have to invest their own resources to open up these new export markets. The geopolitical context was already pushing the region to open up to American producers. The 3Cs Fund might have accelerated some investment processes and provided political cover or coordination for certain activities. But it didn't create the kind of investment environment that led to a complete avalanche of capital covering Central and Eastern Europe. The initial hopes here were definitely much higher. Today, while there are many strategic partners, you get the sense that the initiative is valued because it offers a good overview of what's being planned in the region. Countries from outside, like Turkey, Spain, the US, and Japan, can see what important infrastructure projects are happening and potentially get involved or secure contracts. However, when it comes to the 3Cs truly opening up the region for external capital in a way that makes it extremely attractive for investment, the hopes here were much bigger than what the reality of the 3Cs turned out to be. Short pause. The second reason for a potential lack of satisfaction is the feeling that the 3Cs hasn't evolved into something more, that it remains a very limited form of cooperation, still focused primarily on infrastructure. But it's worth noting that the vision of the 3Cs becoming a tool for building a political bloc, perhaps even positioned against Western Europe, Brussels, or Germany, that kind of thinking largely seemed limited to Poland. Honestly, I haven't encountered many other representatives from 3Cs countries who saw the initiative in quite the same way. Building north-south infrastructure, gas pipelines, railway lines, etc., makes a lot of natural sense for most of the 3Cs countries. It helps address the infrastructure gaps left by historical development that focused more on east-west connections. This is clearly in the interest of almost all participants. But the foundation for building a unified political bloc from Estonia all the way down to Greece? That's a much weaker premise. Even with very limited expectations for the political impact of the 3Cs, it's still hard not to feel a certain lack of fulfillment. Because over these past 10 years, there hasn't been a strong political pulse among the 3Cs leaders. I can't recall a single instance in the last decade where the 3Cs played even a secondary role in any major process happening within the European Union framework. I don't recall any consultations before European Council meetings or any actions influencing the continent's economic policy where the 3Cs countries even signaled a common position, or at least consulted with each other. And this is something we really need to look at more closely. Only EU member states are full members of the 3Cs initiative. There are also associated participating states like Ukraine, Moldova, and now Albania and Montenegro, who are outside the EU but participate in some projects. The European Commission is a strategic partner. And you'd think, if EU institutions were truly objective mechanisms working for continental interests, the goals of the 3Cs would align perfectly with the Commission or the European Parliament's ideas. Yet, for the past 10 years, there's been almost a complete ignoring of the Three Seas initiative by European institutions. It almost seems like, from Brussels' perspective, the Three Seas is an outside entity, not part of the European structure, but something entirely separate. While there's a necessary level of courtesy and acknowledgement, especially when you have strategic partners like the US, Germany, and Japan involved, it's hard to find any formal indication that European institutions are taking the Three Seas truly seriously. Of course, you could argue that the European Union is the biggest investor in the Three Seas because EU funds are often used for these infrastructure projects. But the fact that EU funds flow to less developed countries isn't some special favor or political decision by EU institutions. It's a natural outcome of how the single European market works. On a political level, the European Commission and the European Union have done practically nothing to show that the Three Seas is something they take seriously, or that it could be a tool for shaping policy within the EU. Short pause. All of this brings us to some fundamental questions about what the Three Seas initiative was meant to be, what it is now, and what its future could look like. The initial idea of a really strong, unified relationship with the United States, that idea seems to be losing ground a bit. The concept that the Three Seas was a tool for the Americans to secure their interests in Europe through financial and political presence, and that this same tool would help reduce the development gap between the eastern and western parts of the EU, that idea simply wasn't backed up by sufficient political and financial commitment from the United States. The Americans gained influence through the Three Seas, not by spending dollars, but through words and political gestures. Let's remember, there was a time when the Americans openly stated that for the Three Seas to succeed, Germany needed to be involved. Today, the US is looking to bring investments back home, to rebuild their own industry. They want others to invest in the United States. It's hard to imagine the Americans suddenly launching a massive investment process in Central and Eastern Europe right now. That idea just isn't realistic. Furthermore, whether we like it or not, if the Three Seas is going to be successful in the future, it has to operate more effectively within the European Union framework. Regardless of our feelings about it, the main game shaping the economic future of our continent is played out at the EU level. Even if it's a difficult game, with challenging circumstances and institutional hurdles that we often can't control, this is where it happens. So, for the Three Seas to succeed, it needs to be more effective there. However, if the Three Seas were to suddenly pivot and focus very clearly on relationships with Western Europe, on strong institutional ties with Brussels, Germany, or France, that would actually contradict the very nature of the initiative. It would go back to building political and economic connections along an east-west axis, instead of north-south. It would reinforce thinking about Europe in terms of a center and a periphery. And the Three Seas was supposed to change that thinking. It was meant to be a way for our part of Europe to achieve a degree of self-governance. So, relying heavily on Western Europe wouldn't really be the same initiative. It wouldn't fulfill the same purpose. All of this makes it seem like there's no easy way out of this situation. But there is a strategic direction that could significantly help the Three Seas initiative, particularly within the context of the European Union. It wouldn't contradict its core nature. It wouldn't depend on decisions from external powers. And it fits perfectly with Poland's foreign policy over the last few months and our new security needs. Which EU members lie on the Baltic Sea? Sweden and Finland. Bringing these countries into the Three Seas cooperation would strengthen the initiative within the EU. It would open up possibilities for implementing a whole range of dual-use projects that serve both civilian and security functions, within the Three Seas framework. This direction wouldn't disrupt the initiative's commitment to regional self-governance in relation to Western Europe. And from Poland's perspective, it would be another step in shifting the priorities of our regional policy, where the Baltic-Nordic direction is clearly becoming more important. Of course, the wish list for what the Three Seas initiative could become, what else it could be used for, is much longer. For example, during the G20 summit in India, there was a plan presented to connect India with Europe, using new infrastructure. One of those connections was planned to end in Greece. It seemed natural to me to include the three Cs in these broader plans, to connect it with India, another growing power. But honestly, India has completely different priorities right now, so maybe let's leave that idea for now. Also, something that remains completely undeveloped is the digital sphere of cooperation within the three Cs. I get the impression this was included because digital was a buzzword 10 years ago. Everything was going digital, so it felt necessary to say developing digital cooperation was a priority. And sure, experts can talk about how important digital infrastructure is today. But when it comes to actually supporting mutual startups or exchanging experiences in new technologies, that's just not happening. The focus has really been on the more traditional, almost old-school, physical infrastructure. And yes, if we wanted to list all the reasons for dissatisfaction, everything that could have been done better, why the initiative didn't fulfill its full potential, we could go on and on. But still, from a general perspective, if we have to make an overall assessment, the balance is clearly positive. It's a good thing this initiative exists at all. Both Poland and the region benefit from the three Cs. It's better to have this initiative, even in its current, perhaps incomplete form, than not to have it at all. The three Cs could be more. But operating in this form still brings a number of benefits. The north-south infrastructure, particularly the gas connections, has already made a really significant contribution to our energy security. The same goes for road infrastructure. A part of the Via Carpathia has been built in Poland, and in a wider international context, this improves living standards and economically revitalizes Eastern Poland. The business and economic forums that run alongside the political summits allow for developing contacts and establishing cooperation. A part of Europe that historically hasn't known or cooperated with itself enough is now getting to know itself a little better and cooperating a little more strongly. And Poland is an integral part of that process. The three Cs is an element that helps build Poland's political position in the region. Although looking ahead, I think it's worth seriously considering whether the initiative should continue to be primarily led by the president within the Polish political system. The government, after all, has many more tools for shaping not just foreign policy, but also the economic and infrastructure policies that are central to the three Cs. This isn't about who the president or the government is, but about the systemic approach. However, on this occasion, President Andrzej Duda's role in the creation and current state of the three Cs should definitely be highlighted. Whatever your opinion on other aspects of his foreign or domestic policy, you have to admit that President Duda is leaving behind a tool for creating European policy that the Polish state can use. That's important, and we should emphasize that, while also expressing the hope that future presidents, regardless of their political background, will continue to use this tool, and perhaps even improve it. It's good that it was created, and the fact that there's unused potential is just an opportunity for future leaders to enhance this format. Short pause. Here's a quick thought I wanted to add. If you watch this channel regularly, you might remember last year I suggested that Poland's foreign policy should symbolically highlight the millennium of the coronation of Bolesław Chrobry. It's a perfect pretext to send a clear message that we're not New Europe, that we're not beginners in the continental political game. My point wasn't to put Bolesław Chrobry at the center of modern politics, but to use that historical weight to achieve today's political goals. Something along these lines actually happened during the Three Cs Summit. The President, Prime Minister, and other high-level guests were shown the cloak of St. Maurice. This is the oldest Polish coronation insignia, a 1,000-year-old material testament to the coronation of the first king of Poland. It's a powerful symbol of independence, memory, and the long history of Polish statehood. You could see the recognition on the faces of the assembled leaders. It's fantastic that someone thought to include this during the summit organization, and it's a real shame that Poland's presidency doesn't bring similar symbolic moments to the European Union Council.